You're listening to Coffee and Culture. We're on Talk 1260 and 103.7 KTRC in Santa Fe, streaming at santafe.com. And we're on the air at 2 p.m., just after 2 p.m. on Saturdays and Sundays. I'm your host every other week, and my name is Matthew Chase Daniel. And today I'm talking with Jade Begay, who I've heard about for a while, although I can't remember exactly where. But I received a press release about a new project she's working on and dove into it and watched a couple of the episodes and read about other things. And Jade, you're from this area. You're Dene and Tasuke. So imagine you have experience here in Santa Fe, or maybe you even live here in Santa Fe.
I do, yeah. I'm very much a local and have been, as the people say, born here all my life and
Uh-huh.
grew up in Santa Fe. So like you said, I'm from Tasuque Pueblo, grew up there as a kid and went to high school in Santa Fe, left for a few years for college grad school and moved back. I think around 2015 or 2016. And I've been there ever since and
Nice.
love it.
And
Yeah,
it's
wouldn't change a thing.
when I read about you, it sounds like you're, as you describe your work, it's from the Arctic to the Amazon. And so I
Mm.
imagine you're traveling a lot. And I saw that you were on former President Biden's a committee around the environment. I don't have the name of it right in front of me. But what was that
Yeah,
like? And
it's a
was
wonky
that,
name.
yeah, what was the name?
It was so we called it the Weejack, or, for those of us nerds within that world, we called it Weejack. Some folks, some environmental wonks might, it's comparable to the Knee Jack. Anyhow, it was the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council.
Yeah. And what was that experience like?
It was a really, for me being, I believe I was the second youngest person on that council. It was, I mean, ultimately extreme learning experience. Talk about seeing, how national policy is implemented, but also how to shape it. We were extremely close to not just the EPA, which, the agency, or sorry, the advisory council, we worked mostly in partnership with the EPA, but as the title suggests, it was the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. So the mission actually was for our council to advise the entire federal family, meaning every agency within um, the federal family. So that's transportation, Department of Transportation. That's the White House office. That's Department of Agriculture, Department
Oh,
of Energy. So it was quite the feat, and I got to work alongside another New Mexican, Richard Moore, who is a legendary environmental justice and climate justice advocate who is up in Albuquerque. So shout out to Richard. I wasn't the only New Mexican on the council, and I think that speaks to, yeah, just the great work happening in our state, and the great kind of like leadership and mentorship. Richard is, like I said, a legend. I'm kind of the younger cohort, if you will. And I definitely wouldn't have been in that position without that kind of mentorship and leadership from others on the council. And I think I was one of four Indigenous people
mm-hmm.
on the council. So there were myself, kind of attempting to represent the Southwest. And then there were alongside me, because the Southwest is a big region, there was Carletta Sosi from Havasupai, and then there were um, a few other Native folks repping other regions across
Yeah.
the United States. And
Yeah, well,
like I
New
said,
Mexico, in terms of environmental
mm,
justice, it's an important area both because of
mhm.
extraction, whether it's
Oh yeah, we're the
gas and
one of,
oil and fracking, or
yep,
uranium mining, or bomb production, or there's a whole
yeah,
lot
we're
of
one of,
issues here, and a lot of communities and indigenous communities that are mostly affected by it. Um,
oh,
so I
1000%. Yeah.
I think our per capita importance of environmental justice is probably the highest in the nation here in New Mexico. I
I
don't know.
don't have those stats, but
Yeah,
um, we're up there for sure. And
yeah,
yeah, I was just going to say, when it comes to extraction, fossil fuel extraction, namely New Mexico is, top three, top five in the United States. So yeah, incredibly important place to represent, and it was an honor. It was an honor to see the inside of the machine and how it all works. And it was illuminating. Like, people complain about bureaucracy a lot, and I would say that in that era, which now feels like so long ago,
yeah,
we really
unfortunately.
it really does. Um, well, we really tried to streamline a lot of that bureaucracy. And, I think what can slow down things is the attempt to really consult and make sure community has a voice in it. And that takes time, as we know. Just try holding, some sort of consultation with the 18 tribes in New Mexico, for instance. That's going to take a while. So
Yeah,
it also gave me perspective um, into bureaucracy and why things take certain lengths of time. And we do want progress to move fast and quickly and see results, but it was very informative and gave me a lot of perspective.
yeah. I think, and you were talking about this in one of your podcasts with Dallas Goldtooth about um, the reality of making change compared to the idealism of making change, and how to find that balance. And that's not always an easy balance. And people get impatient with that and frustrated. And I guess with each issue and each time you're moving through it, it's like, do we wait longer and try and make it more perfect, or do we move forward and try and get something done and see a little progress on the books in a way? Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and all of that, unfortunately, feels like it's been thrown away in the last few years. Well, in the last year. Um,
Yeah, I think there's a conversation about, and maybe even a critique about how, this administration, oh, well, how is it that they can get so much done in so little time? And, my response is like, they're not doing anything.
they're just
They're
breaking
not,
things,
they're breaking things. It's easy to break things.
right?
Yeah, if they were developing, building things, we'd be seeing different headlines.
Yeah,
We'd be seeing different results in our, yeah, what voters initially wanted. We'd be seeing positive impacts to the economy, etc. But we're not. Yeah, we're seeing them dismantle and break things, and that can happen quickly. But the reverse or the opposite, when it comes to building, developing, implementing, that takes time. And yeah, as I said before, had a pretty close and very, insider peek into what that looks like and the minutia of all that. And um, yeah, I have a new respect for bureaucracy in a way.
yeah. And I imagine that informs your work moving forward too, that understanding.
Oh, 1000%. I think it was also, I think just, my evolution through, yeah, being, as you've mentioned with Dallas, like an idealistic activist to now someone who's, yeah, more focused on kind of the long trajectory of policy making, of how we, really garner and hold power. That, yeah, my work is committed to a time frame that it definitely exceeds my lifetime. So that's just maturing, I think.
Yeah, good. Well, you've got years ahead of you to
Yes,
put that
yeah.
into action. We have to go to a break. We'll be right back. My name is Matthew Chase Daniel. I'm talking to Jade Begay on Coffee and Culture. You're back listening to Coffee and Culture. We're on Talk 1260 and 103.7 KTRC, streaming at santafe.com. You can find podcasts, this show and past shows, if you look up Coffee and Culture with Matthew Chase Daniel on whatever podcast platform, you should be able to find it. And I always talk to interesting people. I get to choose who I talk to. And so today I'm talking with Jade Begay, who is Tasuki and Danae and lives here in Santa Fe, grew up here, born here all her life. And it's a pleasure I've never met her before. Sometimes on the show, I talk to people I already know, which is easier for me because I know a lot. With Jade, I didn't know, but I've heard her name and um, did a bunch of research online and watched her TED Talk and her thing. But she's doing great work and important work and difficult work. And I thank you for that, Jade, for doing that
Oh,
for the world, for
yeah.
humanity.
Well,
Um,
I really feel like it chose me, and I am, yeah, I'm so grateful for, yeah, the opportunities and the things I've been able to be a part of.
yeah, it feels like, and it's hard to describe exactly what you do. It has a lot to do with environment and
Hmm.
um, and culture and indigenous culture and sort of indigenous valuing indigenous ways of thinking and being and um, shepherding the world
Mm.
and elevating that and creating situations where there's a stronger voice for that. Is that how would you describe your overall thing? And then we'll get to so the reason we're talking right now is because Jade has a new video podcast called Jaded, produced by
Hmm.
Indigenous House, which is interesting and fascinating. And I want to talk more about that soon, but I also want to just sort of hear how you think about your work as a whole, if there is a
Yeah.
whole.
Oh, yeah, there absolutely is. I think as a whole, I'm focused and my sort of mission, if you will, just our values are set around finding solutions that work to the problems that exist in our communities, in our society. I come from, a family of scientists and artists and community organizers.
Mhm.
Um, you know, a, a lot of people in Santa Fe know my mom. She's very much, involved in so many different little circles across Santa
What's your
Fe.
mom's name?
Marita Hines.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, so, I was very much informed by that community, the native art community of Santa Fe. And that kind of propelled me into storytelling from a young age, and the stories that are told for us, about us. So, my early career is really rooted in narrative work, in how narratives shape the way we think, how narratives shape you know who we vote for at the ballot box. There's just so many different ways that narratives inform and shape our reality, and I think yeah, we can talk about this more later, but we're seeing a major, you know, break in truthful narratives and how,
Yeah.
how we uphold the truth in this day and age. But um, yeah, communications, narrative work, that is the kind of root or foundation of my work. And through that work, I got pulled into campaigns and organizing, and that kind of opened up a world of different paths. And so, yeah, I've taken those skills into climate in the climate space, in the indigenous rights space, and have used, those tools and my knowledge of narrative strategy and impact strategy to strengthen and build, and kind of advance climate and indigenous and tribal sovereignty fights across this country and across the world.
Yeah. Um, that's that's important, good work.
Thank you.
Your and pod your podcast, Jaded, is interesting in that it's very it's it's part of that work, and I see that in it, but I also see it as like social media, pop culture,
Mhm.
very engaged in a world that I'm less engaged in. So there's like
Is
all these references that I don't know. Um, there was something about Taylor Swift and some interview with which who I know who that is, but I've never actually listened to any of that. Or so I just find it interesting because it feels like you're breaking a lot of sort of stereotypes about indigenous culture. Um, that indigenous culture is culture in the now, and there's
Mm,
perspectives and there's values maybe that are more related to indigenous ways than mainstream ways, but it's also part of mainstream. It's not separate from that, or and that engaging in this way with this podcast and with um, I don't know who all the guests are, but I know some of the guests are very much in that social media clicks and TikTok-y world. Is that
yeah, yeah. So the podcast Jaded, it is not necessarily we're not leading with my indigenous identity. And that is my choice. I think um, that is always going to come through whether I'm, doing a podcast or an interview like this. That will always somehow come through in my work. And obviously I bring that because that is who I am.
Mhm.
But I think the podcast and the platform in itself, we're experimenting, and we're trying to, intervene, if you will, in this new media landscape, which is so inundated with, as I was just saying, bad information and
Right?
really false, narratives and interpretations. And this platform, is lifting up. I'm one of, a few different. We all happen to be native, but we're talking about things like lifestyle. We're talking about things like, yeah, pop culture. What's happening online. It's a very online um, format, and we try to bring that into the conversations and the interviews that we have, because that's what people are interested in, actually. People are done being lectured about issues and topics, and they already have access to the news, but that's not where the majority of young people or even native people are getting their news. So this is and
They're
people are
getting
getting
their
and
news where? From
they're
from
getting their news
comedy and social media
from
posts and
yes, from their TikTok feeds, from their YouTube channels. And this is, this has been reported just it from all kinds of different media outlets or research groups. And so we're building something where we can tap into that. We need to tap into that. And my show is um, we're it's kind of a we're bringing in all those things, culture, pop culture, politics, and we're coming from an angle of like we are exhausted. We are exhausted by the status quo. We are exhausted by the things that haven't been working in our local governments all the way to our, national, the federal government. We're, exhausted by media giving us, um, you know, uh, kind of watered down news stories or um, strange reporting on the things that are happening in the world right now. We're just kind of exhausted. And let's
right,
come from what if we don't dismiss that jadedness?
right.
What if we don't dismiss that disillusionment? What if we actually sit down and talk about it in an earnest way and give it space and also
Yeah.
have fun with it and also play games. I pop out some games throughout the show and we
Yeah,
we really
sorry, I
oh,
have to interrupt. We have to go to another break, but we'll be right back and
no
talk about
worries.
games. You're back listening to Coffee and Culture. I'm talking with Jade Begay, and we're talking about her new podcast called Jaded, produced by Indigenous House. And it's interesting because, like, your name is Jade, which is like this beautiful green stone, like glowing thing. And you have a very, um, I don't know how to say it. You feel very present and very hopeful and very a beautiful smile and like you're engaged in the world in a way, in a very sort of positive way. And then jaded comes from a different, obviously comes from your name, but it comes from a different linguistic root and it has to do with like some old horse that doesn't you can't ride anymore or something, and then eventually became meaning that we're like disillusioned and just things are you feel like things are dysfunctional. And you were just saying before the break about how what if we not don't give up on hope, but embrace our exhaustion and our frustration. And I think so many people in the world right now are feeling exhausted and frustrated with what can they do? How can they
Mm-hmm.
move in the world? What can they do to make change? Because so much change that people work to do, in my generation and the generation above me, starting in the 60s and the 70s, all this great change or incremental change felt like it was being made to make the world better and communities better and the environment better. And now all of that just feels like it barely made a difference or something. I don't know. Um,
Yeah.
so you're
Well,
embracing this sort of, how does that work that we embrace our jadedness?
yeah. Well, I think that the show is not inherently meant to be nihilistic,
Mhm.
so to speak. It's truthful and, it's a space to let the mask slip. I think people like myself, people who are, in the public eye, we're always um, expected to kind of, you were just saying, I'm doing so much positive work in the world. I should be hopeful. And there are times where I don't feel hopeful and I don't
Yeah,
want to pretend to be hopeful. So we're on the show, we really want to get to a space with our guests to, say the quiet part out loud that many of us, we just don't trust what we're being sold anymore.
yeah,
And not by the politicians, not by our movements, by the media, and maybe that distrust isn't something that we should rush past.
Yeah,
let's sit with it. And that's the invitation on Jaded.
right. And it puts people in a position of vulnerability because
Yes.
normally we jump on a podcast like this and we're all like, blah, 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 blah. Here we are. Isn't this great what we're doing? And, aren't we wonderful? And
Hmm.
you're embracing there's a lot of that humor and light in there, and there's also an embrace of the dark and the difficult and the frustration, and I think that makes it real,
Mm.
and can be
Yes,
disarming maybe to your guests. I've only seen a couple of them, but um, who knows? What's
I hope
the
so.
yeah? What's the guest makeup, and do you choose those, or is that through other producers, or how is that?
Yeah, I got to have a fair amount and I would say a good amount. I'm like, yeah, I think every guest I recommended at some point or another.
Hmm.
And then we went through a long list of folks, and some people didn't have availability, and so this is the group we got for the first round, and it's like you were saying earlier, it's a different. Um, it's not just it's not just activists, it's not just Native activists. It's we have, as you mentioned, we have Dallas Goldtooth, who is a former colleague and friend of mine. We had our first debut episode was Suzanne Lambert, who is a hilarious comedian who I follow online, and came across some of her viral videos. She's known as the Regina George of the left. That's a Mean Girls reference.
Yeah, I'd never heard
And
of her or of Regina George. So
oh
Regina
man,
George of the left was like, oh, so Suzanne Lambert's Regina George is the Suzanne Lambert of the right. Um,
yes. Well, or
but
you could
she's
say the
hilarious and a trip, and just
yes.
watching the energy there, the two of you talking and sitting there was great.
Yeah, she went viral for doing these Republican makeup makeovers on herself. So doing
Mhm.
her makeup as, a Christy Nome would do her makeup, or she did her makeup as Donald Trump does his
Uh,
makeup, and it's so funny. So, and she's trolling the right in, yeah, that's what she's doing, and I think it's just this amazing kind of like, let's flip the script. Let's not be the party or the side or the let's break that stereotype again, for the left or the progressive left, that we always have to be nice and take the high road. And Suzanne is just flipping that on its head and saying, no, we're going to be mean because they're awful people, and we don't need to take the high road anymore.
yeah.
So that was the debut episode. Um, yeah, we have other folks like Suzanne who are, very much online kind of personalities, or what they call themselves, creators.
Hmm.
That's the term for, someone who is creating content and has these big followings and audiences online. So we
Like you
have
and me. No, I'm joking.
I'm like, Matthew, you need to get in there. We need to boost up your content, if you will, make you
Yeah.
go viral.
Okay. Well, I'll get on
Um,
that.
yes, we will. So there's more people like that, because I do want to speak to that audience. I do want to speak to that um, world of people, young people, and there we have some folks who have worked in government, so stay tuned. And someone who plays a particularly interesting role in New Mexico these days, and will in the future, especially this year in 2026. Hint,
Uh-huh.
hint.
Yeah.
And we have yeah, people who are in that world of politics as well join us.
Yeah.
So
Do you have
it's
do you have hope for, it's a big election this fall,
mm,
2026. Do you have where's your hope in the, both in New Mexico and in you know, in DC, for people who are representing us? Do you think things might change?
I will hope is it I have a yeah, hope and I have a weird relationship, but because it's just it feels just nowadays just so like sure, of course I have belief in us being capable of doing things, but beyond hope, I have I have a very um almost competitive nature. And I'm like, we have to win this.
Yeah,
um,
good.
I have more than hope. I have, yeah, like
You're going to make it happen.
strong determination.
Yeah,
And I have anger. I have these other emotions that are just so, fiery, and I'm going to commit to whatever needs to happen. If I
yeah,
need to go volunteer and knock on, you know, thousands of doors in New Mexico, I'm going to go do that. I will do that. And I challenge your listeners to do the same thing.
yeah,
I have more will than hope. I want
yeah.
to
You're
do
mad as hell
something.
and you're not going to take it anymore, as they
Exactly.
said in
Yeah.
the movie.
So
We have to go to another break. This is our last break. We'll be back with another 10 minutes. Hold on. We're back. My name's Matthew Chase Daniel. I'm talking with Jade Begay. I'm here in Santa Fe. She's on the road. She's from here, but works all over the place, from the Arctic to the Amazon, from DC to Montana. And it's a pleasure to get to know you a bit and talk about your work, and that you were just saying that you're, a sort of a reaction to this world of like hope and prayers and like just let's keep this all beautiful. You're saying there's anger and there's frustration and there's and that action can come out of that. And I think that's important, to put out in the world. And the title of your podcast, Jaded, is about that. And as you go through the podcast, it's jumping back and forth. You're talking about, what are people feeling jaded about, but you're also there's a lot of humor and you know, uh, funny games that you play with pick a card, little um, kind of things. It's nice. It's really nice. Um,
yeah, well, we're lightening the space, I think, or we're lightening the mood. And I think there is just, I mean, I can say personally that there every day I'm afraid to go online. It's like, what am I going to see today? Am I going to
mhm.
see, a neighbor like Renee Good get shot, mortally, murdered by an ICE agent? Am I going to see, something, racist and misogynist from our president? It's There's so much coming at us, and it's overwhelming. It's it's really scary. It's intense, and on the show we get into some of these topics and what's happening in our culture and society, but we also bring it down to the personal level. We also bring it down to you know um, the questions in our games of like what's something that you felt powerless about, and how did you navigate that? What's your relationship with self-doubt, and just navigating that personal, the personal plane for a minute. And of course, we zoom in and out from the personal to the macro, but I I wanted the podcast to be a space where um, we can talk about our grievances, whether they're small or big. And it's fine to have small grievances. It's fine to, feel jaded or feel different emotions around the things that are happening on the micro level. That still matters, even though, at any given moment in time, it seems like, our world is combusting.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I'm looking at my notes here. I wrote something down. I'm, incorporating, appropriating, protecting and protecting of knowledge, indigenous knowledge. And my question is that I wrote down is what is the difference in these methods and what is best practice? And I know in a
Mm,
lot of your work, you're working to sort of elevate um, indigenous knowledge, indigenous ways of thinking, not necessarily in this podcast, but in general. And I'm sure it comes through in some of these podcasts, but that there's this difficult line between learning from other cultures, from the mainstream culture, learning from indigenous cultures, um, and appropriating those what they're learning. And so appropriating is bad, but incorporating is good in in the simplistic of terms. But that line
mm,
between the two is difficult. And I know you've done so much work with different indigenous cultures and in the mainstream, whether it's in the White House or in this podcast, and how to just speak a little bit about how you see those lines between those things, or are there no lines? And how do we move forward as a people, as a country, as the world with these issues?
mm. That is a big and deep and very good question. I think at the very what's coming to mind, just off the top of my head, I think if if you have not read Braiding Sweetgrass by whoa, sorry, tongue twister there. Robin Wall Kimmerer, I just highly recommend starting there. I think
Mhm.
Robin's um, teachings in that book are just so vital to how we can incorporate or begin to understand like an indigenous worldview
Mhm.
and how we apply that to the ways we move in this world. I think, you know, I part of something I've been grieving. So the past year or so of this new administration and all the awful things that have happened under it, something that I have been grieving the most is that we did a lot to advance indigenous worldviews being incorporated into governance under the Biden administration. There was a proclamation on how the entire federal government can incorporate indigenous traditional ecological knowledge, ITEC, into their operations and their infrastructure and the way that they do anything, whether that's Department of Transportation or and how we build roads or Department of Energy and how we work with the sun. So to see that be erased essentially,
Mhm.
um, heartbreaking.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've been grieving that, and um, there were so many people behind that effort. One of which I will name, and I highly recommend you follow his work, Dr. Kyle White. He was also on the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council with me, and his work, which is vast, really, goes into that indigenous worldview and how we apply that into governance, into how our cities and towns and communities are built, excuse me, And so there's that approach. And I think on the personal approach, and I think this might be more about, just kind of our lifestyles. I think there's a lot of stereotypical stuff that gets caught up in it, oh, like indigenous worldview, you must be one with nature, and there's that aspect
Yeah.
of it. But I think there's other aspects to indigenous worldview, important ones like democracy. We are some of the first people to practice democracy. And I think people just need to kind of better understand beyond the stereotypical, oh, indigenous people, we're one with nature. There's forms of governance, there's forms of leading society that we have built. There is all
Hmm.
kinds of technology that we were the first ones to design and implement. And I think we need to look at that breadth and that range of um, knowledge and systems thinking that we created and have shared with the world, and apply and start applying those to the ways we live and the ways we move and build culture and society, not just the stereotypical stuff like
Yeah.
to sage your house every day or whatever.
Yeah. Talk to the trees. Yeah.
Yes.
But we can talk to the trees too, if you
Yeah.
can. As
Yeah.
what it
There's
Laurie Anderson once in some song, she says, "All of nature speaks to me. If only I could figure out what they were trying to say."
yeah.
Um, anyway, uh, we're out of time, but thank you so much, Jade Begay, for spending this time with me and with the people who are listening. And please, everyone, check out the podcast, Jaded, Jaded. And you can find it. It's on YouTube and other podcasty place under, and it's through Indigenous House. Um, so thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. This has been so fun.